In an expansive forest with raging rapids, a radio transmission speaks of a sanctuary for survivors. Any survivor can take the best route through the treacherous river, but it's best done with adults. If you have children with you, it's almost impossible to reach them. In a post-apocalyptic world, Malorie Hayes advises two young, unnamed children that they will be going downstream on a river in a boat. Her Spartan instructions specifically advise several precautions. 1. They have to do everything Malorie says and never question it. 2. They have to stay quiet. 3. They are not allowed to remove their blindfolds, regardless of the circumstance. Her strict instructions are for their safety, as any attempt to break her rules will result in the child's punishment, and removing the blindfold results in death. They equip themselves with everything they need for the journey, including several scarlet-chested parakeets. Malorie and the children go out in blindfolds, trying to move around using a cable that leads them to specific points in their surroundings. The ropes they follow lead them to a nearby dock, where they secretly stashed a rowboat. Malorie prepares the boat, pushing it into the rapids. She rows furiously, not knowing if they're going the right way. 5 years earlier, a pregnant Malorie paints a massive image when she is visited by her older sister, Jessica. Jessica tells about a news report shown on television about unexplained mass suicides originating in Romania and quickly spreading across Europe and Siberia. Panic is in the air, as nobody knows the cause of the mass suicide. People only know the tens of thousands of people going into a psychotic break before killing themselves. Jessica is upset that she has to check up on Malorie regularly, who has a routine pregnancy checkup for that day. Jessica tries to talk her sister into loving her upcoming child, the latter having a somewhat cold demeanor for their forthcoming child. Jessica tries to cheer her up, digging up the situation about Ryan, who she implies left her for somebody else. Later on, they go to the doctor for Malorie's OB checkup, who reveals she doesn't want to know the gender of her child. Jessica tries to cheer her sister again, with Dr. Lapham trying to remind Malorie that a child will be a big responsibility that she needs to take seriously. She also reminds her that adoption is an option, rather than ignoring everything. Jessica goes out to prepare their vehicle while Malorie uses the toilet, only for both to witness the start of the ensuing chaos. As she leaves the hospital, Malorie sees a woman bashing her head to death into a glass panel. She runs away to Jessica, driving immediately around town as Malorie believes the Russian event is in America now. An emergency vehicle rams itself into another car. Explosions ensue from behind them. As Jessica drives, she witnesses the phenomenon affecting the masses, with her sclera darkening. She loses control of herself as she moves and the car overturns. Malorie, injured, pulls out of the vehicle. Jessica then walks into the path of an oncoming load truck, killing herself. Chaos continues. Explosions left and right, cars smashing against each other, crowds running in all directions, looking for respite. A woman, Lydia, invites Malorie over to a house for safety, even though her husband, Douglas, disagrees. However, right before she reaches Malorie, she goes into a trance and begins talking to her dead mother. She jumps right into a burning car, which subsequently explodes. Malorie is rescued and brought into their house by Tom, a fleeing passerby. Douglas freaks out over the loss of Lydia, angry that he lost her because she tried to help Malorie. Multiple survivors stayed inside the home, many of which came from the streets. Douglas is pessimistic about their chances of survival. Everyone tells their stories, theorizing about the cause of the mass suicides. At the insistence of Tom, they cover all windows in the house and blindfold themselves whenever they must venture outside. Tom is being extra attentive to Malorie, who is grieving the loss of Jessica just minutes before. Later, Malorie tries to rest for the night, but she's unable to fall asleep. In the present, Malorie and the children have been in the river for 6 hours, simply riding the rapids downstream. Malorie is tired while she tries to keep everything in order. She hails their destination on the radio again, but they experience radio silence. The birds start to feel agitated as she hears voices calling her name. Back at the safe house, bodies litter the nearby road. It's been 3 days, and people are holed up in their holes, trying to connect via radio transmission. People advise staying indoors and not looking at the things. The food situation is getting worse, with Douglas still annoyed with Malorie. A wild knock comes at the door, with a pregnant woman named Olympia coming in for respite. As the supply of food decreases and Olympia adds in, Douglas becomes more bitter about the situation, continuing to dismiss Malorie. Greg, one of the survivors, suggests using cameras to see outside, as these are simply indirect ways to look out. He volunteers to tie himself to a chair while monitoring the surveillance cameras to see if they can successfully use these devices. As they leave Greg in the office, he starts to look out, seeing nothing weird outside. Meanwhile, Malorie and Douglas have another argument while everyone remains agitated. Felix and Lucy, two younger survivors, are flirting with each other. As Greg looks, a gust of wind comes on the screen, followed by a looming shadow. This is enough to infect him, changing the color of his sclera. A loud thumping comes from the room, pushing everyone to check. They find Greg killing himself by rocking his chair violently, slamming his head into a hearthstone after seeing it. This shocks everyone in the room, making them lose hope even further. Later that night, Malorie and Olympia share a moment, contrasting their lives as would-be mothers. Malorie continues to be anxious, with Tom making sure she's as comfortable as possible. In the present, it's been 14 hours since Malorie and the children started their journey. A man calls them, saying that he's willing to help them as long as they remove their blindfolds. Malorie pulls out a handgun to find where the voice comes from. As she fires shots blind, the rotund boatman ambushes her, forcing Malorie to remove her blindfolds. They fight each other, with the man blathering about how he's seen the truth. Malorie thinks fast on her feet, pulling a machete to strike her attacker, killing him. She tries to reorient them in the right direction, continuing to row again. Back in the past, Tom pulls everyone together as the last of their supplies are finished. Tom, Malorie, Charlie, Douglas, and Lucy decide to go to a supermarket close by to restock. They start by blocking out all the car windows, planning to use GPS as their mode of direction. As they go out, Tom maneuvers the vehicle with precision. He uses the vehicle's proximity sensor to evade blockades while running over the corpses outside. As they drive blind, their sensors start activating from all sides, with the entities checking the vehicle's contents, unable to penetrate it. They reach their destination, with the group using blindfolds as they guide themselves around. They find everything they need to survive, including food and necessities. Inside, Tom and Malorie flirt with each other, wishing they met each other at a better time. As she checks around, Malorie finds pet birds, deciding to take them along with their supplies. Meanwhile, a heavily drunk Douglas tries to convince them to stay at the supermarket. The group hears a loud bang, realizing that a person is on the other side of the door. The group attempts to help Fish Fingers, a co-worker of Charlie, who is in prison and a little crazy. He's locked inside the loading dock, begging for help, but as they are about to help him, the birds Malorie saved go into a hysterical fury. The group is attacked by the infected co-worker, who somehow wants to infect everybody else. In a moment of heroism, Charlie sacrifices himself to save the others, dying in the process. They make it back safely to the house, only for everyone to realize that the birds can detect the presence of the entities. When the other survivors look for Charlie, Douglas callously dismisses his heroic deed, only for Malorie to scold him. Sometime after, Douglas and Malorie discuss what happened, with the former trying to enact his perceived intellectual superiority over the former. Regardless, Malorie does not back down, eventually going at peace with the obnoxious older man. Later, Felix and Lucy steal the car and drive away, removing what singular transportation they had. In the present, Malorie and the kids have been rowing for 24 hours, hitting a truck that fell in the middle of the river. This capsizes the boat, dropping all their supplies with Boy overboard. She immediately tries to grab the child, trying to keep him warm. They finally dock at a nearby riverbank, as Malorie uses a guide wire to move around for potential supplies at a nearby settlement. She hears wood chimes to guide her, getting inside what seems to be a small clinic. She scrounges for supplies, only to realize the entities are around. She tries to return to the boat, eventually falling off a cliff. Girl tries to search for Malorie, only to feel the entity around her. Malorie pulls her back to the boat in time with a guide rope, scolding the child for not following her rules. They row once again, continuing their adventure. After 28 hours on the river, Malorie tries to hail once again, but to no avail. At the house, Malorie and Tom share a moment, with Tom sharing his stories of hope from his tour of service. She tries to use their new radios to hail others, only to see Olympia let Gary, a stranger and apparent lone survivor of another group, into the house against Douglas's objections. Gary tells his side of the story, revealing that people try to convince others to look at the creature. Douglas gets extremely upset and starts threatening the others with a shotgun, and is knocked unconscious by Cheryl, an elderly survivor. Douglas is subsequently imprisoned in the garage. Olympia breaks down, admitting that she opened the door for Gary simply because she remembered the kindness she experienced when it was her at the door. Malorie tries to calm her down, with Olympia asking her to be her child's guardian if something ever happens to her. Malorie gifts Olympia a small stuffed Hello Kitty doll, telling her to give it to her child once she comes of age. In the present, girl holds onto the doll, implying she is Olympia's daughter. 38 hours on the river, Malorie is still rowing, lecturing the kids about the rapids. She says that one of the kids has to look out to help her steer the boat safely. Boy volunteers to look, but Malorie silences him, implying she wants girl to look. Later, Olympia and Malorie go into labor, with Cheryl and Tom helping with the births. Meanwhile, Gary starts to take out various drawings of the entity as the girls give birth. He uses these photos to marvel at his handiwork, indicating that he is part of the people taken by the creature. Malorie births a boy, while Olympia has a girl. Meanwhile, Gary puts the birds in the freezer while peeking outside, removing the covers and inviting the creatures in. Tom, finding the drawings, tries to spring into action, only for Gary to blindside him with a rock to the head, making him fall unconscious. As he taunts Douglas, he shows his irises, revealing that he genuinely is infected. Gary opens the garage doors where Douglas was imprisoned, prompting him to duck and cover. He goes up to the second floor, unveiling all the covers. Malorie and Cheryl protect themselves in time, but a weakened Olympia looks out, jumping out of the window just after Malorie takes her child. Gary forces open Cheryl's eyes, making her stab her neck repeatedly. As Malorie protects the newborn, Gary tries to take them, only for Douglas to come to the rescue. Douglas shoots Gary with the shotgun, only to graze his arm as he hits blind. Gary pushes Douglas off the banisters, killing him with a pair of scissors. Tom starts to regain consciousness, overpowering Gary and killing him. 5 years later, Tom and Malorie live together with the children, simply naming them boy and girl. They train the children to locate sounds as they scrounge up supplies from nearby homes, building a network of guiding wires. As Malorie goes on a supply run, a band of people comes with cars, scouting the area and immediately leaving after. She reports this to Tom, with whom she currently shares a romantic relationship. Later that day, they receive a transmission from a survivor named Rick, stating that they are well and safe in a community hidden in the forest. Rick instructs them to prepare for a 2-day journey, at some point needing someone to look. The couple does not understand many of the details of the choppy transmission, but he notes their compound has a lot of birds to signify their location. Malorie and Tom argue over the truth behind the transmission, with Tom wanting to move while Malorie is afraid to go. Tom tells the kids fanciful stories of the outside world, but Malorie argues with him, unwilling to give the children false hope. Tom wants to give the children hope, as Malorie is unwilling to do so. Later that night, Tom tries to comfort her, giving her hope too. They eventually make up, sharing a Pop-Tart with the kids to help cheer them up. However, their happy moment is cut short as the infected survivors return, ambushing them. Tom sacrifices himself, killing all the infected while he fights the creature's calls just enough to save Malorie and the children. The grief-stricken Malorie decides on the journey, giving the children strict instructions to help them go down the river on a boat. In the present, Malorie and the children reach the rapids, finally ready to pick one of the children. However, she's unable to pick any of them, seeing the hope that everyone entrusted her. She decides not to look, row blind amid the raging rapids. The boat eventually capsizes, washing them off to a nearby rock embankment. They survive the rapids, only to traverse the wild forest blind once again. The creature finds them, haunting her with the voices of her loved ones. Malorie falls down a cliff, only to wake up with the kids missing. The creature tries to tempt the kids with Malorie's voice, but they do not yield. She finds Boy immediately, but Girl is still missing. Boy notes that Girl is too scared of Malorie to return. Malorie apologizes to the children, completing Tom's story to show she truly cares for them. Girl returns to Malorie without taking her blindfold off. The creature tries to tempt her one last time, only to agitate the birds nearby, eventually helping them find the community they were searching for. They open the doors for her, realizing that the sanctuary is a former school for the blind and that many members of the community are blind. Rick leads them around, showing a vast aviary that allows movement in an open indoor space, safe from the creature. Because of this, Malorie releases the pet birds from the box to the other birds up on the ceiling. Malorie sees Dr. Lapham, who survived the entire ordeal. As Lapham asks their name, They only tell her their names are girl and boy. Malorie finally gives the children names, boy being Tom and girl being Olympia. As they play around, they are given a new hope in this sanctuary, where they never need to blindfold their eyes ever again.